I need to do something about my scrap fabric hoard. It's just gotten a little disorganized. It's taking up a little bit more space than I would like for it to. Let's see how much of it I can use and make small projects out of. So I'm gonna start by sorting out stuff that is too small to be used for anything and put that in a shred pile. And then from everything that is big enough to make something with, I don't know, I guess I'll just start making piles and see where we go from there. I sorted my scraps into piles loosely based on the type of fabric or the general vibe of the fabric, like a pile of summery bright colors and a pile for darker wintry colors. This was also a good chance to take stock of what I actually have and start brainstorming my projects. I often find that the lists of things you can make with scraps that I find online to be mostly, well, useless if not just downright ugly. Like, who genuinely needs a lip balm holder for one single lip balm that can easily fall out if turned upside down? And for the time being, I won't be doing any patchwork since I'm focusing on using up the larger scraps and remnants that I have for larger projects and working my way down in size. Basically, I just want to make sure that I'm only making things that I actually like and will use, or that can reasonably be gifted, and not just wasting energy on projects just for the sake of using up scraps.
One eternity later.
So over a month has gone by since I sorted my scrap fabric. Let's get back on track and pick up what I was doing before, which is making some pillowcases out of this velvet fabric. Specifically an envelope pillowcase, which is the easiest to make. It's just a long rectangle folded over on top of itself, and that folded over part is the opening to put the pillow in. It's really easy. You just adjust it to the measurements that you need for your specific pillow insert. I had 3 pieces of this velvet fabric that I combined lengthwise to make one larger piece. You could also do this with multiple different patterns of fabric for an eclectic patchwork look. This fabric likes to move around a lot though, so I tried using tearaway stabilizer and stay stitches to minimize this. Once the pieces were combined, I cut it into rectangles that were at least an inch longer than the pillow from top to bottom and double the width of the pillow, plus a minimum of 2, ideally 3 or 4 extra inches for the overlap. So this piece is about 16 by 33 for a 15 by 15 pillow. I was able to get 2 rectangles of this size from my combined pieces of fabric. Then I folded under and top stitched the short ends, which will make the envelope opening, before folding my rectangle right sides together with the ends overlapping. I made sure my total width came out to 15 inches, clipping or pinning it together and sewing along the top and bottom seams. Again though, this fabric was such a pain in the butt, which meant lots of stay stitches and redoing a few seams, even having to do 1/2 of the envelope at a time to circumvent all the shiftiness of this fabric. And even with all that, there were still a few tension issues where the fabric overlaps, but I spent enough time trying to fix it, and honestly, it's good enough. It's just for a decorative pillow. Next, I wanted to make a bucket hat using this leftover curtain material, and I used a free pattern from the Mood Fabric website. I also used my leftover pink gingham fabric for the lining to make it reversible. I think this would also be cool with a different fabric for each layer of the hat if you don't have enough for the whole hat from just one fabric. After cutting out all the pieces, I added interfacing to the gingham brim pieces, then attached the brims and the hat sides along their side seams. When I went to attach the tops to the sides, however, it became clear that there were some measurement issues with this pattern, as the circumference of the top circle was a bit bigger than the opening of the side pieces, and likewise, when attaching the brim, the bottom opening of the sides was bigger than the circumference of the brim opening. This was incredibly frustrating and required a lot of finagling, but eventually I got things to line up. After clipping and understitching the seams of each side of the hat, I sandwiched them right sides together and stitched along the bottom edge of the brim, leaving an opening of a few inches to later flip the hat right sides out. Lastly, I top stitched around the circumference of the brim to keep the layers together and tacked the pieces together on the seams of the side pieces as well. I finally decided on a project to use up some of this toile fabric that I've been hoarding for a few years, opting to make a lace front corset belt. I used a corset belt I already have as a guide to make a mock-up, making adjustments to the size and shape as needed. Once I was happy with the fit, I cut out 2 front and 2 back pieces for each of the 3 layers, which included using up some old vintage linen napkins for the lining and a stabilizer. I ironed the stabilizer onto the lining, then attached the front and back pieces along the side seams. And then because I'm a crazy person, I decided to try adding boning. This item probably doesn't really need it, but I thought some extra support couldn't hurt. I attached the boning to the inside of the lining layer, then left it under some heavy books overnight to try flattening it out, since the iron did absolute diddly squat. I then attached the pieces right sides together, leaving the back edge open so that I could flip it right sides out. After clipping the curves and ironing everything flat, I top stitched the pieces together along the lines of the boning, as well as top stitching along the connected edges. Next, I added hook and eye closure tape to the back opening by sandwiching it in between the fabric, folded in on itself. This part was really tricky, trying to avoid hitting the hardware with my needle. The last step was to add my eyelets on the front. I usually like smaller eyelets, but the larger ones felt more appropriate for a belt this size, especially since my ribbon was a bit too wide for the smaller ones. I actually just thrifted this ribbon the other day, and it's a really close color match. I love how that worked out. Next I made, you guessed it, another headscarf, because I do plan to be a frolicking this upcoming spring and summer. I know I just made one in a recent video, but I figured here I could give you a little more detail. Like before, I just traced an existing headscarf that I have, adding extra fabric to account for finishing the edges. I serged each edge before folding it under to create less bulk. I left the corners where the ties will attach slightly open though, not taking the stitch all the way down to the end. For the ties, I decided to use ribbon instead of making them out of the same fabric, as this fabric was really unstable, and I didn't think it would stand up well to being made into tiny spaghetti noodles, and especially not to tying them and putting all that tension on it. Again, I just copied the length of the ties from the original headscarf, then sandwiched the end of the ribbon into the slightly open corners of the triangle and top stitched them in place. The last thing I had time for was making a couple of pocket squares my 6-year-old nephew requested. He's a very dapper little man. I used this scrap of red satin for a fancier one and this green cotton one for a more casual look. Admittedly, the green fabric wasn't really a scrap, but the idea still applies. I cut them into 11 by 11 squares, which is smaller than a typical pocket square, but these are for a child. For the green fabric, I folded under the edges with a mitered corner and top stitched them down. The red satin fabric was much trickier, so I went with a rolled hem done on the serger. I tried not to worry too much about these being perfect, since there is about an 80% probability of my nephew losing them in the next 6 months, but he seemed rather happy with them when I delivered them to him yesterday. I also began working on patching a pair of my jeans with some scrap lace, but I'll have to wait to show you that another time in another video because I am so out of time. And down here, this large basket that I just thrifted recently because I'm a sucker for a good basket is where I've been putting the scraps of my scraps as I've been making these projects. Blood of my blood, scraps of my scraps. Something like that. I still have so much that I want to make and do with what I have left over. Like, this was just putting a dent in the pile, honestly. Just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to do. And then in here is everything that I need to shred still, but I'm kind of putting it off because shredding fabric is very tedious. Let me know if you want a part 2 because I have so much more stuff that I want to make with these small scraps and remnants. If you made it to the end of this video, leave a butterfly emoji down in the comments. Thank you guys for watching and hanging out with me today. I'm gonna go deliver these little pocket squares to a very precocious little boy that I hear upstairs right now. So I'll see you guys next time.